From the heart of Orlando, Florida, you are listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice Radio. And I am your host, David Gornoski, and thank you again. Welcome. Welcome back to my program. So glad you could join me in my neighborhood in beautiful Central Florida here in Orlando. The problems we have, they are so simple. We do not need a rocket scientist to figure them out. But just in case, in studio once again is my good friend, Dr. Weiping Yu, physicist over at Kennedy Space Center.
Thank you, David, for having me again.
Thank you for joining me. And this is going to be an amazing program, as all of our programs are. So you're not going to want to miss a minute of it for the next hour. I want people to remember the premise of this entire show. The premise of this entire show and all of my writings at all the conservative and independent news sites that I write for is about having personhood as the key guiding principle, not groupthink. If we're stuck on groupthink, we get caught in dogma, and we get caught always depending on, well, I'll just trust the experts, whatever the consensus is. And that's great because they're right on a lot of things. But sometimes when we have big government prop up groupthink consensus, it calcifies into dogma. And that dogma has a way of shielding people from more accurate information that develops if we had a real free market where capital is able to flow to solutions. And that includes medicine. So joining me on the program today is a world-renowned biologist. His name is Dr. Thomas Seyfried, and I have had the pleasure of speaking with him a few times, and I've enjoyed every time I do, because he is one of those people who challenges groupthink dogma, and he looks for real solutions. And in this case, he looks at cancer, which is a big, scary word for a lot of people. There's a lot of people that are just there. I think I have a personal theory that there's a lot of people that have a subconscious fear of all these major illnesses, and it drives them to have despair. It drives them to fear. It drives them to anxiety, which leads to scapegoating their neighbor or blaming other parties and, always getting caught up in hate and division. But if we can look for real solutions ourselves by challenging groupthink, perhaps we don't have to live in that fear. Perhaps we can live in a sense of gratitude and courage, knowing that these things, these big monsters like illnesses, are not the monsters we think they are. They're actually gnats. And with a little bit of ingenuity, we can actually see these illnesses in the driver's seat. We're going to see them leaving us behind in history. So, Dr. Seyfried, thank you for joining me.
Well, great, David. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
I'm really excited about your work. Now, you are at Boston College, and
that's right.
you have spent years. How long have you been in the business of this research here in the cancer field?
Well, we started our work in cancer while I was at Yale University, maybe 35 years ago. And then I took the program to Boston College. But we've been working on epilepsy and lipid storage diseases like Tay-Sachs disease, as well as cancer and a variety of other of neurodegenerative diseases. So, but the cancer problem has always been a main thrust for us for about over 30 years.
Very good. Now, you wrote a book called Cancer as a Metabolic Disease, and it's on the origin, the management, and the prevention of cancer. And you basically are challenging the reigning paradigm which dominates cancer research, and that is that cancer is a genetic disease. Can you explain briefly the difference between what you have discovered, that it's a metabolic disease, versus what the conventional paradigm is stuck in, which is a genetic disease?
Yes. Well, the idea that cancer is a metabolic disease originates with the work of the distinguished scientist Otto Warburg from Germany, where over about 100 years ago, he clearly defined what the nature of cancer was. It was a defect in respiration. Cells couldn't breathe or obtain oxygen, use oxygen for energy, and they would fall back on this ancient fermentation pathway. Fermentation is the development of energy without oxygen. And basically, he was a Nobel Prize winner for discovering issues for respiration. And he had it clearly defined all these years ago. And basically what I did was, we did basic research, and I did, to be honest with you, I heard the word Warburg, like everyone in science does, but I didn't really know what he actually did in the cancer field until we started evaluating what happens when you do calorie restriction and ketogenic diets on these cancer cells, and they were dying. And I said, wow, this is really amazing. And, what's the origin of this? And you find out that Otto Warburg had clearly defined the nature of the problem many years ago. And then it became clear to me, I said, why don't we recognize this guy for having defined the origin of the disease? And then it became very clear that the field had forgotten about Warburg or considered him to be wrong, and then went on chasing all these genes. Now, not to say that gene mutations aren't present in cancer cells, they are. But we have found, and others have found, that these are all downstream epiphenomena. They're not the cause, they're the effect of the damage to the respiration. So once you realize that the origin is a metabolic disease, and you can explain very clearly that the gene mutations are an effect and not the cause, then the whole field becomes questionable. And the problem is, of course, as you've mentioned in your introduction, people have this dogmatic view that cancer is a genetic disease, and they've spent billions and billions of dollars on this. And now we realize that it's fundamentally wrong. And it's very hard to turn the ship with a massive momentum. So it's going to take some time for people to realize that most of what we're doing in the cancer field is absurd.
That's right. Thomas Kuhn, he was a scientific philosopher, and he had he was known for the one who introduced the word paradigm shift. And he said that, a lot of scientists, when they're operating in a paradigm, in a given dogma, they operate by faith that the dogma that they have received is true. Now, that's not a knock against them. That's just the way science actually works on a day-to-day basis. And so what you're doing is you're challenging that dogma because you're looking at the data and you're finding that it's not just random genetic mutation. That is a downstream effect that is present with cancer, but you're finding that it has to do with metabolism, which for our listeners, metabolism is our energy, right? It's how we get our food.
Yes, it's energy is everything. Without energy, a cell can't live. Nothing can live without fundamental energy, and that's ATP. So the difference between a normal cell and a tumor cell is how they make ATP. And normal cells, all of us are breathing. You're talking to me, I'm speaking to you, mainly because I'm breathing and you're breathing. But if we were to hold our breath, we would both go unconscious. Now, cancer cells don't use this kind of energy. They use a fermentation energy. This is the kind of energy that existed on our planet before oxygen came into the atmosphere. There were a large number of organisms on our planet that existed using fermentation energy, and there was no oxygen in the atmosphere. When oxygen came in, we had the development of multicellular organisms, and eventually, we all evolved into these different organisms. But the cancer cell is simply falling back on this ancient pathway to generate energy without oxygen. And the issue is, what are they using to generate fermentation energy? And it's two simple molecules. It's glucose, the sugar, and the amino acid glutamine. And when you take those two fuels away from the tumor cells, they die very easily. There's no tumor cell that can survive without glucose and glutamine. And when we challenge glucose and glutamine in every single system of cancer, the cells die.
Wow.
Now, the issue, of course, is that we could easily implement this, and we're doing that on patients, and the cancer cells die. So the question is, why don't we use this more openly? But of course, you're going to have to change what everybody thinks the nature of the disease is.
Can you explain briefly what a ketogenic diet is? It's something that I've actually incorporated into my lifestyle, and I'm finding a lot of health benefits with it. But briefly for the listeners, what is a ketogenic diet?
Yeah, the ketogenic, and the downside of the term, it's just the word diet. In sophisticated medicine, diet is like always ambiguous and not clear. Diet can be almost anything. The ketogenic diet just happens to be labeled with the word diet. It's actually ketogenic metabolic therapy, and it's a type of medicine. It shouldn't be viewed as a diet, and that's just unfortunate. And terms and labels and things can certainly jade the way somebody would view something. But basically, what it is a consumption of fat, and you can achieve what we call therapeutic ketosis. You can do it with ketogenic diet, or you can do it by simply water-only fasting. Blood sugar goes down. If you stop eating, blood sugar goes down. There's no way you're going to achieve high levels of blood sugar if you don't eat food. So what you do is water-only fast, blood sugar goes down, but we don't go unconscious. Our brain needs glucose. But we can also burn fats, and we make these ketone bodies. This is like putting long-chain fatty acids into a wood chipper, and out come these small water-soluble products from fats. And they will replace glucose for our brain. This is an evolutionarily conserved adaptation to the absence of food. So when you go on these ketogenic diets or water-only therapeutic fasting and this kind of thing, blood sugar goes down gradually. Oh, well, we have to have an alternative fuel, otherwise we're all going to go unconscious. And the brain and the liver starts metabolizing fats. We start taking fats out of all parts of our body. They go to the liver. The liver puts them in this metabolic wood chipper, and out come these little water-soluble ketone bodies, and they replace glucose so that our brains and the rest of our physiology can function. So what happens then is you're transitioning the body away from a sugar molecule to a water-soluble fat molecule, the ketone body, and this is what we call therapeutic ketosis, and you lose weight when you do this, obviously, because you're not taking in glucose. You get fat from eating sugar. You don't get fat from eating fat. That's the misconception. If you eat fat, you lose weight. If you eat sugar, you gain weight.
Wow.
So these are the things that have to be recognized.
See, now that's what I call challenging groupthink. I like this. We're talking to Dr. Thomas Seyfried. He is a world-renowned researcher in the field of cancer. He's using the ketogenic diet to get significant results. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice Radio. I'm your host, David Gornoski. We'll see you in just a few seconds. And welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice Radio. The great Aretha Franklin bringing us back to the show on the freeway. She passed away today, and we honor her and her memory of what she did to bring joy to millions of people with her voice. We are speaking here on A Neighbor's Choice Radio. I'm your host, as always, David Gornoski, and I'm joined with my co-host, Dr. Weiping Yu. He's in the house once again to give us his physics perspective. And we are joined with a really special guest. He is someone on the front lines of challenging groupthink in the world of cancer. Perhaps, folks, we don't need to rely only on toxic therapies like chemo, radiation, and that kind of thing. Maybe we can solve these things without so much toxins. And that's what Dr. Seyfried is doing. He's got an idea that it's all about ketogenic diet mixed with a very careful use of certain very cheap and inexpensive drugs compared to what the conventional medicine costs. And he's finding significant results with many, many, many years of research to back it up. Thanks again, Dr. Seyfried, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, David.
If you want to call in to ask him a question, you can at 407-916-5400. That's 407-916-5400. And I wanted to go back to kind of the basic principles. So you are challenging what government has kind of calcified as a dogma, which is that cancer is genetic. All money needs to be thrown at trying to find the genes that are causing all this and reverse that or engineer those some way. And then you've got this idea that no, based on the Nobel Prize winner Otto Warburg, that it's actually a metabolic paradigm, which means it's about our energy. It's about what we eat. And you said fat is not the cause of fat, but it's actually sugar or carbohydrates, eating lots of grains and that kind of thing, which is really causing the conditions for cancer.
Yeah, well, you're talking about prevention of cancer versus management of cancer.
Right.
Now, I'm in the management business. I mean, we know how to prevent cancer. If you keep your mitochondria healthy, you don't get cancer. I mean, cancer would be extremely rare if people kept their mitochondria healthy.
What is mitochondria for people that...
Your mitochondria are the little organelles inside cells that make the energy. In other words, when we breathe oxygen, it's the energy that we're getting from the oxygen is coming out of these little tiny organelles inside the cells called mitochondria. They're the power plant of our cells. So when they get damaged, that's the aging. Everything. If your mitochondria remain healthy, you live long and you live disease free. The problem is, of course, is that when you damage these little organelles, they lead to a whole array of different diseases, and the disease that we, of course, are working on is cancer. And that was, as you said, was delineated many years ago by Otto Warburg. And what we've come to realize is that cancer cells use fermentation for energy, which is an ancient pathway. And then you have to say is what are the fuels that the tumor cell needs to generate energy from fermentation? And the two main fuels are glucose, which is the sugar, and an amino acid called glutamine. And if you take glucose and glutamine away from tumor cells, they die. Now, there's no tumor cell that we have yet to find that can survive without these two simple fermentable fuels. So now it's not as simple as I'm making it, because we can easily lower glucose by fasting and ketogenic diets and this kind of thing. But glutamine, the amino acid, we're challenged by that because our immune system needs the same amino acid that the cancer cell needs. So when we developed this concept called press pulse metabolic therapy, where we use a suppression of glucose through diets and drugs, and then we use targeted drugs that will specifically take away glutamine, and we degrade the tumor slowly and gradually, and at the same time we remove all kinds of other maladies that these people have. So we've seen cancer patients come in, they've got type 2 diabetes, they've got high triglycerides, they've got all these other issues. When we put them on metabolic therapy, all of that other stuff goes away, and the cancer cells die. Now, do we cure anybody? I don't know. We haven't been doing it long enough, but we've got a lot of people that should be dead, and they're still walking around. So the question is, you do this because you're targeting the very essence of the disease. You're not chasing genes, which are red herrings. You're going after the very fundamental issue that keeps those cells alive, which is glucose and glutamine.
So glucose
when you target those effectively, you destroy the tumor.
So glucose, it's what we call commonly sugar, and that, yes, for people who don't realize that's not just sugar. That's it, when you eat carbohydrates, a lot of them, a lot of grains, that kind of thing, rice, potatoes, lots of high carb food, that gets converted off into glucose, right? That's what's happening in the body.
Yes.
So that's what you have to eliminate. So there's two issues we have here. We have prevention, how to keep people in an optimal state where their cell energy is healthy. It can't ferment, right? And then... Yeah,
well, I mean, the basic thing is, we know what we need to do to prevent cancer. The problem is we're living in an environment where there's so many tasty foods, there's so many different things in the environment. We know it's a challenge. We're all not going to crawl back into a cave and just, eat raw meat and stuff like this. We're living in a technological age. But if we know what we need to do to keep our mitochondria healthy, then we can certainly prevent cancer. But, we have over 1 million new cases of cancer every day. 1,600 people a day are dying from cancer. So we need to stop the death. Right now, of course, if we prevent cancer, then we can do that. But we have to change diets and lifestyles, and most people don't want to hear about that. They come to us when they say, okay, I've got stage 4 triple-negative breast or glioblastoma, pancreatic cancer, and this. What are you going to do for me? Well, you're not going to tell this poor guy, well, you shouldn't have eaten all this stuff in the past. You can't do that. You have to say, okay, we can reverse this, and we can keep you healthy if you target glucose and glutamine. And the problem, of course, is that there is no clinic in the United States anywhere that's doing this.
Wow.
And that's the great tragedy. We have 1,600 people a day dying from cancer. People don't know that, but the data are out there, and we're not doing anything specifically to stop that.
So in the 1960s, the federal government with Nixon declared a war on cancer. Here we are, 2018. Is the annual death count for cancer going down or up?
No, it's not. It's going up faster than the population. And the reason for this, the large reason for the massive death of cancer, and I don't have to convince anybody that people are dying from cancer like there's no tomorrow, is because people think it's a genetic disease. And that's the great tragedy. And the federal government and all of the major hospitals and institutions are all challenging this disease as if it were a genetic disease. And consequently, you have 1,600 people a day dying from this. You can hear the horrific. Even poor Aretha Franklin, who you just mentioned, had pancreatic cancer.
Oh, wow.
So you're talking about a disease that becomes unmanageable, and the absurdity is that we're chasing the disease as if it were a genetic disease, and this is the great tragedy. The tragedy is we have suffering and death as the result of a misunderstanding of what the nature of the disease is, and that's the bottom line.
Wow. So we're talking here with Dr. Thomas Seyfried, and he is a hero. I consider you a personal hero of mine because what you are doing is so essential. There's this massive human suffering taking place, and then the chemo and radiation adds to the suffering. And you're saying if we go back to the source, rethink the science behind what causes cancer, we can attack this illness and really beat it back. And that, to me, is so important. That's like Galileo for this, because you're going up against this orthodoxy that says, you shall not challenge us. And here you are doing it, and you're getting results. Now, you have people all over the world who are doing things that are corroborating what you're seeing with your therapy using ketogenic diet and some glutamine inhibitors, right?
Yeah, well, the problem is we have more flexibility in countries outside the United States, and they're able to practice what we're telling them without being blasted by a program, what we call the standard of care, by the American Medical Association, which seems to be written in granite, that's unflexible. In other words, we have to treat cancer patients with horrific radiation chemo and these other absurd immunotherapies. And then once the patients fail on these things, then they say, well, maybe metabolic therapy. No. If you do metabolic therapy up front, the results are going to be so superior to what we have because the other radiation chemo immunotherapies are all based on the gene theory of cancer, which is totally wrong and it's flawed. So once you realize that the treatments you're using is based on a flawed theory, 1,600 people a day are dying from the disease.
Wow. So we have to challenge groupthink. We have to rethink what is at the basis of this paradigm that's causing so much problems. I'm speaking here with Dr. Thomas Seyfried. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice Radio. I'll see you in just a few minutes on News Radio WFLA.
What you want, baby, I got it. What you need, do you know I got it? All I'm asking is for a little respect when you come home. Hey, baby.
And welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice Radio, the most electrifying show in media where we look to solve real problems people suffer from. You know, whether it's pollution, whether it's, trying to find new opportunities for jobs or even medicine, some of these big chronic illnesses that people have fear of and they have suffering through. And so we try to just roll up our sleeves, talk to innovators, people who are on the front lines of innovation and challenging groupthink and getting real results. And so we're here with Dr. Thomas Seyfried, who is from Boston College, and he's dedicated his life to challenging the reigning government-sponsored and propped up paradigm about cancer, that it's genetic. He says, no, it's actually something that can be solved through energy. Dr. Yu, you're a physicist. You're in the house giving us our perspective on new innovation for science. Do you have a question?
Oh, yes. First of all, Dr. Seyfried, it's what an honor to hear you in person. This is the best cancer lesson I ever learned. Okay. I wanted to explain, see what I understand, see if that's correct. So when you say, cancer is not, genetic disease. So basically you mean have nothing to do with our parents or with our, ancestors. It's about, our life, individual life ourselves. Is that right?
Yeah, well, what we can inherit from our parents is risk. So there are some genes, like the BRCA1 that you hear about with Angelina Jolie, and then you have certain other inherited genes. Now, these genes put you at risk for cancer only if the gene damages the mitochondria, like I was saying before. So as Otto Warburg said, there are many secondary causes of cancer, but there's only one primary cause, and that's the damage to the respiration, the mitochondria in the cell. So if you inherit a gene from your parents that puts you at a risk, that gene damages the respiration. However, we know that no gene is 100% penetrant, meaning that if everybody has that gene, they definitely get the disease. We know that BRCA1 is about 50% penetrant. That means that 50% of the people that have the mutation in that gene don't get cancer. The mutation causes cancer only if you damage the respiration. So that means the gene is not a primary cause, it's a secondary cause. The only primary cause is damage to the respiration. So if that's the case, you can institute lifestyle changes to significantly reduce the risk of getting cancer, despite the fact that you may have inherited a risk factor from your parents. So this is the issue.
Great answer. Okay, so now I want to go further. So you mentioned about the normal cell versus cancer cell. So basically, the cancer cell, if it's a metabolic process, so being damaged by some kind of environmental cause, right? After it damaged, so what happens? The cell lost its respiration function. Is that correct?
Yeah. So what happens? This goes back. So when the cell loses its respiration, it signals to the nucleus to say, okay, we are suffocating. And it doesn't happen overnight. Like Otto Warburg said, if the respiration is damaged too acutely, the cell will die and, of course, never become cancer. So what causes cancer is a chronic damage to the respiration over time. It could be, months, years, decades. The problem is the cell gradually loses its capacity to breathe oxygen and begins to ferment. And there's a very sophisticated signaling process that allows some cells to upregulate pathways to generate energy from fermentation, this ancient pathway. Now, you also have to realize that all of the cells that existed on our planet before oxygen came into the environment were highly proliferative. They would proliferate like crazy until they used up the fermentable fuels in the environment, and then they would die. The cancer cell is doing the exact same thing. It's entering into a state of unbridled proliferation, which is the definition of cancer. Cancer is cell division out of control. That's the medical definition of cancer. And what these cancer cells are doing is simply falling back on this pathway that existed for all cells before oxygen came in, and then they would die when you took away the fermentable fuels. So what's driving the cancer in our body is two fuels, glucose and glutamine. When you take glucose and glutamine away, the cancer cells die. And if you do it the right way, you can enhance the health of the normal cells while killing the tumor cells without toxicity. The problem is the medical establishment, for whatever reason, fails to understand this simple biological fact.
Wonderful. So that explains why fermentation process is a very long process. It's a slow process.
Yes.
Because it's like wine, right? That's what I think of fermentation of wine.
Wine, right.
Yes,
because you lost the faster.
But that's yeast. That's yeast fermentation.
Yeast
You're making
fermentation,
alcohol.
yes.
What we call in this, it's called lactic acid fermentation. This is what happens when you ferment glucose into lactic acid. You're forming lactic acid, and this causes the acidification of the cancer microenvironment. This is why you get horrible smells from cancer. This is why it smells like rotting flesh and all this other stuff. This is from the fermentation metabolism. You go into the clinics and you see cancer. Some of these poor people, sometimes the smell from opening up the cavity is stifling. This is from the fermentation metabolism. So you already know what these cells are doing. So the problem is you just got to simply take away the fermentable fuels. This is not a complicated problem. In fact, it's so simple, it's embarrassing. But the problem is that when you think the disease is caused by gene mutations, you're not thinking about fermentation.
Wow. So we're talking here with Dr. Thomas Seyfried, who is a pioneer challenging the groupthink of cancer research and finding significant results when he focuses on diet combined with glutamine inhibitors, which is a cheaper drug than what's currently used with chemo and radiation. And I am fascinated by this. Dr. Yu, you are a physicist that challenges groupthink in your field, and I see a lot of resonance with both of these ideas and how it might actually apply here. And again, we're just here to rethink these ideas. Doesn't mean we have all the final answers. Yes. We want to challenge these groupthinks and see if maybe we can get some new insights. We have a caller that is from Mount Verde, and you're a doctor. Is that correct, John?
In a manner of speaking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead with
orally speaking, I should say.
Okay. What's your question?
My question is, this kind of makes sense to me. I can agree with it, but isn't there a certain amount of natural degradation of the mitochondria as we age also, so they lose some of their capability to breathe as we speak?
Great question, John.
Yes.
Dr. Seyfried, what would you say to that?
Yes, he's absolutely correct. In fact, we die because our mitochondria go dead. And that's the aging process, and that's one of the great phenomena. Now, here's the situation. It comes back to thermodynamics. It's the second law of thermodynamics, which is called entropy or disorder. Everyone on the planet will die. All things will die eventually because we run out of energy because of disorder, entropy. And entropy, aging is entropy. And if you keep your mitochondria healthy, all you do is delay the inevitable. You don't live forever. You're just going to delay the inevitable. This gentleman who just called is absolutely right. Mitochondria are responsible for the aging process, but if they're damaged too early, they will lead to the formation of cancer.
John, any other questions?
No, that makes perfect sense.
Thank
All
you.
things stand to repeat.
Thank you. I appreciate your call. At 407-916-5400, we're speaking with Dr. Thomas Seyfried, and we're going to hold just for a second because on the next segment, we're going to get into some of the things that people can learn from Dr. Seyfried going forward. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice Radio on News Radio WFLA. I'll see you in a second.
Change, 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 change.
The beautiful Aretha Franklin, folks, and her gorgeous voice inspired millions of people. She's passed away today, and we honor her with this show. She passed away of pancreatic cancer, it turned out, and that's a deadly illness that a lot of people are just suffering from right now. And I want everybody to know right now that we really are serious. We are dead serious about challenging groupthink. We are not going to live in fear. We're not going to live in this kind of bystander effect where we all sit and say, well, I hope someone else figures it out one day. No, no, no. Ladies and gentlemen, on A Neighbor's Choice, we will get things done. And that's what we're doing right now with Dr. Thomas Seyfried, who is from Boston College, and he is a hero of mine because he is challenging the outdated, toxic paradigm that is really not the effective way to deal with cancer. And you're getting significant results. And I guarantee you, Dr. Seyfried, I'm going to do what I can to personally do the things necessary to get your information to the people. I understand that you are relying on private donations, right? Because there's no government support for this when it's actually working, right?
Well, there's a lot of NIH money in cancer, of course. And, you get large amounts of money to study cancer, but it's very hard to get money if you want to actually resolve the disease. I think people think it's not resolvable, and that's a fallacy. And another tragedy, of course, is why should we have to go to Turkey and Egypt to find therapies that actually can keep people alive much longer with a higher quality of life? Why can't we do it in the United States? So why can't we treat cancer as a metabolic disease in the United States? And also in some of the other Western, like England, they can't do it there either. You have to do standard of care. And standard of care is surgery, radiation, and chemo, and maybe you're going to use this new immunotherapy, which is I call as a Rube Goldberg, which is a very complicated way of doing something very simple. It's extremely expensive that can actually kill patients. There's no reason why anyone should be treated with any kind of a therapy, but it puts them at risk for death. And this is the absurdity that we're up against. When people go in for cancer treatment, surgery, they do surgery, they do chemo and radiation. This can put, we don't know how many people are actually dying from these horrific toxic treatments than from the disease itself. And this is one of the great problems that we have that very few people discuss. All we know is the facts. 1,600 people a day in the United States are dying from cancer.
And they don't need to be. That's the thing. They don't need to be.
Over 8,000 a day are dying. It's a worldwide epidemic, and it's being treated under a therapy that's been shown to be flawed. So you tell me what's going on with this.
Well, we're going to get to the bottom of this. I want to keep investigating this. I want to find out why the government, the land of the free and the home of the brave, in Declaration of Independence, it says that the government was there to secure our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in a country that was built on that idea, there is no reason why we should tolerate a government that cannot get their act together and let people try alternative therapies like what you're doing. And I say no more. It's time to solve this problem and see it in the rear view mirror of history. It's outdated. We don't need to stick to these outdated toxic therapies for cancer. There are real solutions. You're getting them. You're actually going off to, Budapest tomorrow?
Yeah, we have to go to different countries to prove the concepts. In other words, I'm shocked because they contacted me based on my book and my theories, and they said we're treating patients with tremendous success. Stage 4 pancreas, stage 4 breast, stage 4 colon, stage 4 uterine, and they're getting very, very good results. I'm not saying they cure everybody. Don't get me. I'm not saying we cure. I'm saying that the results that we're getting using metabolic therapy are superior to the results that we're getting using toxic chemo and all this other stuff. And the latest boondoggle in this whole thing is this immunotherapy. You see it on TV at night, and you heard it on NPR today when these people are saying, oh, cancer cells are smart. They're not smart. Cancer cells are stupid. The people who are treating them are also stupid. And if you don't understand the biology of the disease, you end up with a catastrophe that we call cancer that's slaughtering all these people. That's the great tragedy.
Well, together we're going to beat cancer. Dr. Seyfried, thank you so much for what you're doing. Dr. Yu, any last comments or thoughts?
Sure. I just wanted to thank you. One thing is, seems by listening to you, so make me think about the difference between the two health cell and the normal cell versus cancer cell. Seems like the damaged, the defective cell, normal cell, defective cell, they changed the metabolic process because they lost the interaction with the oxygen. So it go back to the ancient way for fermentation. Once the metabolic process changing, what happens? Behavior changing. So that's why it behave differently than normal cell that become cancer. That's a great explanation.
Yes, and then we use ketones to keep all the normal healthy cells healthy while we take away glucose and glutamine. It's very simple. It's not a complicated problem.
Well, let me tell you, Dr. Yu's theory of physics is really aligning very, very closely with exactly what you're finding in the lab with cancer research. So we are with you 100%. We're going to do what we can to get the word out so that people can have real solutions in lovely, beautiful lives the way God intended us to have. Thank you, Dr. Seyfried, and thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I appreciate it. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is another episode of A Neighbor's Choice, and I've had a wonderful time learning from this hero, Dr. Seyfried. He's on the front lines of battling cancer, and I think we can see a time in my lifetime and Dr. Yu's lifetime where we can beat cancer as a civilization, folks. We're going to beat it. We're going to send it to the ash heap of history, just like scurvy. And one more thing before I leave. I want to dedicate the final segments of this show, we only have a few minutes, to a friend of mine named Monica Paulus. She's a lady in Papua New Guinea. And she was falsely accused. She's a friend that I've been able to get to meet on Facebook. She's a friend, and I count her friendship dearly because what she did in Papua New Guinea, She was falsely accused of being a witch by the tribes that live in Papua New Guinea. And she overcame it. Over in Papua New Guinea, they are locked into groupthink. They still believe that witchcraft is what really dominates the environment there. And so they burn witches for no reason other than groupthink. Well, folks, Monica Paulus, she was almost murdered by a group of people trying to accuse her falsely of witchcraft, and she survived. And you know what she's doing? She's had opportunities to go to other countries where it's safer, where she could live in a country where they're not trying to accuse her and burn her alive for lies. And you know what she didn't do? She didn't leave. She is still in Papua New Guinea right now, fighting for other women who are falsely accused of witchcraft. And we are going to put her on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, there are so many things we can do to change the world if we just let go of groupthink and love our neighbor as ourselves. Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Gornoski with my friend Dr. Yu. You've been listening to A Neighbor's Choice Radio. We'll see you next week on News Radio WFLA.